My eye is drawn upward by this forest. Everywhere I look. It's magnificent, and it kind of makes me want to do that. Look up. Which is what cathedrals do. And this is a quiet, reverent place. It's like a cathedral. Another thing that's interesting about these woods is how much life there is. It's late spring, early summer. And so all of these trees up here are starting just barely to leaf out. And it's green and it smells pregnant, the air. And if you look back here, you can see blossoms on some of the trees. It's just beautiful and natural. And nature is life. Well, yes. I mean, right here I'm standing on a deer trail and you can see deer pellets. And so, yeah, there's a lot of life here. But also on this deer trail, right here, you can see bones. Nature is life and nature is death. It's interesting. Yeah. It makes me think about that last quote from The Last Samurai. Life in every breath, in every cup of tea, in every life we take. There is something to this, recognition of mortality, which is, on the one hand just part of the picture, but on the other hand kind of sacred, and it improves the quality of the life as well. And that isn't, embittered fatalism. It is a recognition of the whole. And it takes some moral courage to say that the whole, including the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, are good. Go to the Old Testament. God created the world and said it is good. It takes a fair amount of nerve for a human being to say the same thing. Because saying that the whole picture is good means saying that the whole picture, which includes death and suffering and decay, is good and whole. Incidentally, the word whole and health are from the same root. The word hail, holy, holistic, all from the same root word, meaning complete. Complete picture, full context, full understanding of what it is that you are about and what you are in and what you are, because you understand where you come from, where you're going, what your purpose is. And to be able to think about purpose, because the Dawkinites deny that such a thing exists, and that is not wholesome, even if there is truth in what they say. That part is not wholesome. And frankly, I don't think there's a ton of truth in what they say. But yeah, I'll take evolutionary psychology with a grain of salt and appreciate its insights. I love natural selection. It's a useful feature in gardening. But the radically materialist view doesn't leave any room for values that are not subjective. And if you say that there are no values that are not subjective, what you're saying is people have figments of their imagination which they act on, which is the same thing as saying there is no value. So I am not remotely willing to accept that proposition. So I have to reject materialism on some level, to say that life and death actually do mean something. They actually have greater significance. Yeah. And it's okay if I don't understand what that is. That's fine. I just have faith, oh dear, that word again, that there is significance beyond what I can see. And so yeah, these are thoughts in the Cathedral of the Woods. Do you hear that? That's the organ playing. There's a very old association between mountains and temples. Very, very old. Comes in a bunch of different forms. Sacred groves of various kinds. Moses going up on the mountain. A bunch of Book of Mormon prophets do it too. Nephi, that's where he goes to commune and get instructions on how to proceed in his journey. It's just a very nice thing. I think a lot of people have the experience of something holy in the woods, and that's why they want it to be sacred and not profaned. People like the Sierra Club or other environmental activist groups feel something sacred about being out here, and it leads them to want to preserve it, which I can see. I tend to be, a little bit more 19th century in my opinions about nature, where I have reverence for it, and I'm trying to develop a little more reverence for it. But at the same time, I really like looking at things and seeing, as MacGyver would, all the ways they can be used to experience nature not only as a whole, but also as potential parts in a creation of my own making. And for that reason, I'm sympathetic to mining and forestry and a lot of the other stuff. So it's interesting. There is a wholeness here, and some people are very tuned into that and desire to preserve that, to preserve sacred spaces. And I do too. But not everywhere. I would like to still maintain farms and factories and iPhones, or in this case an Android device. Yeah. Stop spying on me, Google. Except for when I broadcast this stuff online. It's probably worth making the argument for why objective values are a thing. Frankly, it is a faith proposition. And there is an argument against objective values, which is not internally inconsistent and therefore can stand on its own 2 feet. At least as a mental theory, not as a theory that you can act out. Because, let's say you argue with me. You say, well, that's wrong. Values aren't objective, they're subjective. To that I say, okay, values are subjective. Take that to its logical conclusion, and we basically say they're a figment of human imaginations that we tend to act on, but they don't actually mean anything. Okay, that's your proposition. Now tell me this. We're debating right now, we're discussing, and you seem to have your ire up because I believe something wrong. Now, if you manage to make really good arguments, do you believe that I should believe them? The fact that you are arguing presupposes an ethic. And granted, that's not a very broad ethic, but it says that you both believe that values are subjective and don't, which means you're contradicting yourself. So it's kind of a cheap trick. You could say, well, I don't care what you believe, and values are subjective, and I believe that. And, on one level, I can say, okay, at least that argument is internally consistent. But your actions aren't. Because if you believe that truth matters, if you believe that anything is holy or sacred or worth pursuing for its own sake, valuable, you've just reintroduced values into the equation. And in order for human beings to act, they have to believe, logically speaking, that what they are doing matters and is valuable. That is a precondition of being able to act at all. So you could say, well, I believe that values don't really exist, they're purely subjective, but humans act, therefore they tend to believe, including me on some level, believe that values don't exist. I admit that I have cognitive dissonance and I don't believe this. And that's fine. That is an internally consistent thing, and I can't convince you otherwise. That's fine. Because it is a faith proposition. The concept that value exists as an independent thing and that life has meaning is not something that I can establish using pure logic. Similar to the fact that I can't establish that truth exists using pure logic. What is it the Greeks said? Nothing can be known, not even this. At least they were self-aware enough to add that last caveat. Because if you say nothing can be known, guess what? You know something. Hence something can be known, hence you're an idiot. It's kind of funny. There's only a few things in this world that are not faith propositions if you push them hard enough using philosophical methods. Basically, philosophical methods equals doubt. You say, do I really believe that? Do I really believe that? And you push it further and further and further until eventually you come to a wall. And we call that the wall of faith. There's a couple of exceptions to the wall of faith. René Descartes identified one. He said, I can't really doubt that I'm thinking. I exist because I'm thinking. Therefore I exist. A couple other ones that really aren't choices is one, humans have to make choices. That is something that you can't deny. You can't deny and be rational at the same time. So that's one. You have to make decisions. You don't get to choose whether or not you make decisions because even not choosing counts as a decision. Sorry about that. That's the way life is. And honestly, that is painful and difficult, so I don't want to be smug about that because, making choices hurts. Yeah, that's thing number one. Thing we don't get to choose number one is whether or not we choose, and thing we don't get to choose whether or not we have faith about is whether or not we have faith. Because at some level, every proposition, whether a factual proposition, a statement of the way things are, like reality exists, does it or no? Tell me about that. The philosophers can push you on even that, and they'll push you up to a wall of, you guessed it, faith. And faith, I should probably define that. Faith is a belief that is supported by the will rather than certainty. It is a belief that is supported by an assertion on some level. Now, in the doctrine of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, so specifically in the Book of Mormon, a book of Scripture, that is a book of Scripture similar to the Bible, there is a sermon given by a prophet named Alma. And one of the things he says about faith is just fascinating. He says that faith can either be well-placed or poorly placed. It can be either good or bad. So basically, he's taking the whole problem of epistemology, which in philosophy is the question of how you know what you know. Like, okay, how do you know that the universe wasn't created 2 minutes ago? How do you know what you know? Like, do you really know that for sure? Is it just for you to say that you have knowledge, or do you really just kind of believe it? I mean, your buddy tells you something and you say, well, I believe it. Well, do you really know? I mean, he could be lying. He could have been drunk. Like, there's a whole bunch of options here. So your knowledge might be misplaced. It might not be justified, and it might not be true. And even if you believe something randomly, and it happens to be true, can you show your work? Can you explain why it's true? If not, then you don't have knowledge. So Alma takes the position. Alma does a really interesting thing there. He says, okay, I'm not talking about knowledge. Let's talk about faith. When is faith well placed? When is trust well placed? Because, guess what? The knowledge problem isn't purely theoretical. You need knowledge in order to act, in order to make decisions in your life. And guess what? That unfortunately isn't optional. You have to make decisions. Even not making a decision counts as a decision. So, he talks about the fruits. He talks about you watch, you see, you make your best educated guess, you believe, and then you pay attention to your truth sense, this sense of right and wrong that humans naturally have, conscience. He describes it as a swelling feeling in the chest. I'm trying to identify that feeling. that you can kind of feel when things are right, when there's a rat in a problem. So you're told a story and something doesn't smell right. That. And the opposite end of that is something good is here. Now you can hone that, and clearly you can be deceived. Humans can be deceived, so the truth sense is not inviolable. But it is like, it's like the difference between hotter and colder. Maybe you can't tell the exact temperature, but you can tell if you're moving in the right direction. And that is a darn cool thing. My dad, when he was 6 years old, was given a lesson in Sunday school in church that said, if you have sufficient faith, you can move mountains, which is a doctrine from the Bible. And he thought, well, that's kind of dumb. If I could move a mountain and had that power, why wouldn't I just fly over it? Because he desperately wanted to fly. He was one of those kids who had that dream about flying all the time. And he was obsessed with airplanes and just loved everything that had to do with the air. And so he thought, if I just believe hard enough, if I just believe, I'll be able to fly. And so one day, take your son to work day or something like that, he's with my grandpa at a construction site, and he climbs up to the second or third story, and he yells, "Hey Dad, watch this!" And with the absolute innocence, childlike belief of a 6-year-old, he leapt to his doom. Fortunately, miraculously, he survived with only a broken bone. I think he broke his leg on the way down. And, that was a little rattling for him, I'm sure. I had faith. Why didn't I fly? Well, according to Alma, this way of understanding it, faith needs to be placed in things which are true. And do you ever have certainty such that you can say that you have knowledge? No. Flat no. You don't get certainty. It's one of the things humans don't get to choose, is whether or not to apply faith. But you can have justified trust, which we call faith, good faith. So there's good faith, there is bad faith, there is good trust, there is inappropriate trust, and it is a real trick to know the difference between the two. Yeah, I hope this video has been helpful and interesting to you. It's really just me walking around in the Cathedral of the Woods by myself, talking about faith and epistemology and other philosophical stuff. I just stepped off the path and felt weird about it. And I couldn't put a finger to why I felt weird about it, because I figured this was a shortcut. And I think the reason I feel weird about it is because it feels like treading on sacred ground. You're profaning something. So I'm going to turn around and walk back on the path. And do I have to do that? No. Would it endanger my immortal soul if I did? Probably not. Almost certainly not. But I think it's probably healthy for that immortal soul to recognize things as sacred. So I'm going to walk on the path until I feel otherwise. I'm grateful I had that experience. That's a cool experience. To experience something as sacred or beautiful. That is wonderful. A lot of what I've done in this video is philosophical, talking about the limits of reason, those things that you cannot doubt, arguing for the existence of things. Now, I can argue about the existence of bread, or I could just eat it. And one of those is going to be a lot more satisfying. One of them might be more fun for an intellectual debate. Argue against me, tell me the bread doesn't exist. Actually, that's pretty easy. American bread stinks. But if you actually experience it, that's a different thing. And sometimes you just need to use the head long enough to find the edges of what the head is useful for. See, now the road is starting to wander the wrong way, so I am going to actually cut across. I'm going to do it the taekwondo way. I'm going to bow first. Entering a sacred space. I make myself ready. Okay, here we go. That's a thing. In dojos, you bow before you enter the mat, because the mat is a place of learning, and that is a sacred space. It is a special space, a reserved space. So, yeah, and it's a place where you want to be different. You want to enter to have certain experiences that you don't have in your day-to-day life, and where you learn, and where the boundaries are a little different. It's a way of dividing it and being open to experience. Gosh. Okay, I'm going to put my phone away so I can experience it. Cue outro. You are watching a channel called Good and Basic, and what we talk about is basic stuff, which tends to be either philosophy or how to make things from radical scratch, just pushing things to understand the fundamentals. What is basic? What is essence? What is the truest true? What's the basics? And the other half of what I tend to talk about, and what Other Joseph tends to talk about, is value. What makes something good? How do you know? Is a technology good or bad? Does it make your life better or worse? How do you even know that better and worse are things? They are. They are. For instance, you made a decision to watch this video, and hopefully you think it was better than all the other things you could have done in those 10 minutes. I appreciate you being here. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe below. And if you would really like to see more of our content, hit the bell icon down below. That bell icon will give you updates every time we post new stuff. And sometimes it will be builds, sometimes it will be smelts, sometimes it will be more philosophical. But in all cases, it should be both good and basic. Have a great day. We'll see you next time. The road goes ever on and on, down to the door where it began. See you next time.